sharing now. Perfect. All right, so keep introducing yourselves in the chat if you haven't already. During our event, we encourage you to share comments, thoughts, reactions in the chat throughout the presentation, and a member of our team will also monitor the chat for any questions. And just so you know, Ripple's events are recorded, and the recordings will be sent out to attendees and registrants after the event, along with any supporting materials from today's session, including a quick feedback form that will help us improve our events in the future. Lastly, we ask that you remain muted during the event unless our presenters ask folks to unmute. You'll also have a chance to fully unmute and show your faces during the breakout portion of this session. But before we get started into the actual content, Ripple has an exciting opportunity to share with you. One that's all about advancing professional learning and strengthening our collective impact. So Ripple is expanding its network, and we are currently accepting applications for researchers and organizations dedicated to improving professional learning for educators. You can find out more information, including the applications, on our website, which will pop into the chat now. And I just realized I didn't introduce myself. So hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Krista Morales. I'm Ripple's Network Engagement and Learning Manager, which is why I just made this comment about us expanding our network. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at team@ripplepartnership.org, and we will get you situated with the right people. And today we are joined by distinguished presenters and facilitators, all of whom have very impressive but long titles. So I'd like to introduce them as Stacy Alicea, Ariel Bogoslav, Aliza Hussein, Francisco Santelli, Brenda Santos, Nate Schwartz, and Purvaja Sundar. So I already pinned all of them, so you should be able to see the intro speakers. So those are their faces. Wave hello. Hi, everyone. Okay, so moving along, in just a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Stacy to discuss the origins of our measurement work. Then our presenters will discuss the ELA measurement toolkit specifically, and then offer up 2 use cases. Then you'll join our presenters in a more intimate setting when we're in breakout rooms. And then we'll close out with some reflections and announcements. So with that, the floor is yours, Stacy.
Thanks, Krista. Next slide. Okay, so I think everybody on this webinar today is familiar with Ripple at this point. I think what we want to highlight here is that we're now 130 plus PL organizations, researchers, school system leaders, and funders who are really thinking about the ways that we can improve PL at scale. And so we've grown, we've tripled over the past 2 years, and we really are the only organization of its kind doing this type of work. Next slide. And when Ripple originally started, the big question was really around how we could bring in PL providers and districts across the country and have sustained research practice partnerships that would allow us to better study what PL design features worked, who they worked for, and under what conditions they worked, specifically to improve educational outcomes for historically marginalized students. Next slide, Krista. The challenge with this is that trying to do research across many different entities using many different measures across different studies and contexts is a real challenge. It's difficult to run the same study in different places and look at heterogeneous effects. Most of our partners and districts use different measures that are localized to their particular context, and it's hard to interpret how findings apply more generally across different contexts when thinking about this. And then finally, it's hard to separate out the differences between professional learning and differences in measurement and meta-analyses. And so it became clear early on in our work that we really needed better measures and systems in order to do the type of work we wanted to do at scale over time, so that we are able to know if and how professional learning services are working, again, who they're working for and under what conditions they're working, but also how we can identify ways that we can improve those services. And so about a year and a half ago, we embarked on a journey to begin thinking about how we could develop a shared measurement system like this so that we would be able to do common measurement across our professional learning providers, our district partners, and our professional learning studies. Phase one of this work just concluded last year at the end of 2024. And what that looked like was Ripple alongside 6 professional learning organizations, collectively agreeing on a common set of subconstructs and measurement tools along with a system specifically focused on ELA. Phase 2 of this work just kicked off in 2025 and is focused on those same organizations implementing a pilot of that measurement system. In addition to implementing the pilot, part of the work also helped us to identify subconstructs for which tools didn't exist. And so there are some measurement gaps that we're trying to address as part of this pilot as well. Next slide, Krista. Just want to give a huge shout out to the organizations anchoring this work. It's our founding members, and ENED as well as an affiliate plus, who tirelessly came to sessions every single month, met in person, poured over hundreds of pages of tools so that we could get to a place, and then took on the huge task of trying to pilot this over the next 2 years in various districts across their portfolios. None of this would be possible without them or support from the Schusterman Family Foundation, who has funded this work. So thank you to all of you. And I'm going to turn it over now to our research team, and they're going to dig more into the measurement toolkit.
Thanks, Stacy. So this is where we've landed. We have developed this Assessing ELA Curriculum Shifts toolkit that provides recommendations on key measures that we think we can all be using. Now, we'll sometimes call this a measurement toolkit. We'll sometimes call it a pilot measurement toolkit because this feels very much like the first year of work that is going to develop over time. But we think this provides the kinds of measures that would let us all gather the same data versus gathering something different. And if you go to the next slide, I will just talk quickly about what you're going to see here and what phase one actually consisted of. So phase one started by trying to figure out, when we talk about ELA curriculum shifts and the professional learning associated with them, what do we actually mean? What do we care about? What are the dimensions, constructs, subconstructs, and the ways that these things relate to each other? And in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Ariel, who will actually walk through what felt like it didn't feel like the most important part of the work when we first entered into it. When we first entered into this, we thought we were just going to identify a bunch of surveys and observation tools. And I think what we came out and realized was that it actually wasn't just identifying the measures, it was figuring out what we wanted to measure that felt like actually the hardest part of this. So we'll go into that in detail. But then you'll see that what we did was we found measurement tools that tried to measure different parts of these constructs and subconstructs. And we did that through 2 directions. We did that trying to figure out, what do researchers use? What's available on the research side? What do practice organizations use? And how do we turn those into something that feels like a feasible thing that all of us can do together? And so that turned into a short list and then a pilot toolkit. So I will pass to Ariel, who will describe this process of creating consensus about what we care about most.
I think we need to click a little bit forward so that we have the, oh, I didn't realize this was all animated. Okay, thank you for everyone's patience. I'm trying to make sure that I can show you this graphic in a way that's not overwhelming you with lots of text that is in a very small font. So as Nate mentioned, it was more than just highlighting tools, but we really wanted to spend time to understand, how do we decide what it is that we're even going to measure? And so we started by trying to build consensus across the 6 participating organizations around a high-level theory of action for how we envision professional learning operating in schools. And so we started this process by looking for commonalities across each organization's own theory of action, as well as holding those up against the research base. So what you see on this slide is that at the highest level, we have consensus that the professional learning we would expect to lead to changes in instructional practice. Now that's potentially via changing teachers' beliefs, or that beliefs are influenced by changes in instructional practice. And then together, those changes in practice and beliefs will lead to shifts in students' social, emotional, and academic outcomes. And then if you go back up to the top of that diagram, that we felt that it was important to recognize here that the professional learning is not operating within a vacuum, but is within school and district contexts. And so there are important conditions there that might affect how the rest of this theory of action would play out. But trying to capture everything across these high level, what we refer to as dimensions, through common tools would be just an absolutely enormous task, and one that was not ultimately realistic for this initial scope. And so as we were looking through each participating organization's theory of action, we saw a common theme around using professional learning to support the implementation of high quality instructional materials. And so in concert with this being a widespread focus among states and districts now, that became the focus of this theory of action and the common measurement work to more specifically look at the role of professional learning in supporting curriculum shifts in ELA. So this then led us to the question of what constructs within each of these dimensions were the most important for professional learning to successfully support HQIM initiatives. Next slide. Within the dimensions of school and system conditions, we collectively honed in on the role of the existing system infrastructure in supporting high-quality instructional materials implementation. But that construct is still quite broad and can mean a lot of different things. So then for each of these dimensions, we went a click deeper to identify what we call in the toolkit subconstructs to guide our search for more specific measurement tools. Next slide. So in the case of the school and system conditions, we identified the following subconstructs. First, the extent to which there's coherence between the new curriculum materials and other aspects of the instructional system. This might be things like the vision for instruction, assessments, teacher evaluation systems, RTI, and MTSS. Teachers' experience of coherence is also a theme that came up again and again in both the professional literature, professional learning literature, and literature on school improvement, as well as in the theory of actions of the participating organizations. And it is often specifically highlighted as something that professional learning must attend to and can even support and build. And so we would expect the level of coherence that's already in the system to affect how professional learning is designed and how it might operate. And then secondly, the extent to which the basic foundational structures for high quality materials are in place. And these are things like school schedules that include sufficient time for professional learning, that teachers actually have access to all the materials involved in the curriculum, and the process by which it was adopted. Because of course, what a coach or PLC leader can do if time for PL is a challenge or the materials aren't available to teachers is dramatically different than what we would see if those structures are in place. Next slide. When we came to thinking about professional learning, our collective felt that one of the most important constructs was the extent to which the professional learning is providing opportunities for teachers to build the core skills that are required for implementing the curriculum that they're working with. This is not at all to say that other features of professional learning like dosage or opportunities for collaboration and other things that, that Ripple talks about in some of our synthesis briefs are not also important, but rather that we felt that this construct was really central and specific to the use of PL to support shifts in curriculum. And so worth specifically highlighting in our toolkit. Within this, more specifically, we're highlighting the three subconstructs that you see in the second box here within professional learning. First, that the professional learning is providing structured opportunities for teachers to have deliberate practice using the curriculum and adapting it for student needs and identities. We also include in B and C teachers' perceptions of the relevance of professional learning and its applicability to their individual needs as indicators of teachers' engagement in professional learning, which we know is important for the PL to impact instructional practice. Next slide. And then as a result of participating in professional learning, we would hope to see that teachers implement high quality instructional materials with integrity, that is adhering to the core components of rigor and quality in the materials while also skillfully adapting for students' needs and identities. Next slide. And we break that down in the toolkit into the distinct subconstructs that you see here of maintaining integrity to the core components of the curriculum. This is things like text quality, grade level rigor, standards alignment, and accurate portrayal of content, adapting specifically for student learning needs, and then also adapting instruction to be culturally and linguistically responsive and affirming for the specific students in the classroom. Now, these are really hard things to measure, particularly around the adaptation, because of how context dependent they are. The adaptations required are going to be different in every classroom and for different groups of students. And so when we searched in the literature, we unsurprisingly struggled to find high quality tools that measured them. So the toolkit offers some initial measurement tools here, but work is currently underway to continue to strengthen the measures in these areas. And that is why you see the asterisks next to each subconstruct here. Next slide. We also know that teachers' beliefs and mindsets play an important role in how curricular materials show up in the classroom and whether they support or don't support student learning. But we have a limited understanding of how to measure, let alone change teacher beliefs and mindsets. And that actually left a lot of the professional learning organizations who participated in this collective to focus primarily on practice and not directly address beliefs and mindsets. So that wasn't true of all of them. We include teacher beliefs and mindsets here to recognize the important role, but it is not yet part of the toolkit and in terms of the tools that we have available. We hope, though, that future work will allow us to identify rigorous ways to measure teachers' beliefs, specifically focused on the subconstructs that you see here, that with the right teacher support, all students can engage in the rigorous tasks included in curricular materials, and also believing in the importance and value of culturally and linguistically affirming instruction. Adding these tools, of course, will then allow us to better understand how professional learning can affect teacher beliefs and whether that is through or as a precursor to changes in instructional practices, or possibly both. Next slide. Finally, in the bottom two boxes, we include the primary focus of both professional learning and curriculum implementation initiatives to achieve the interrelated goals of providing positive learning experiences for students and supporting students in mastering grade level content. Because of course, it's difficult to engage in learning when the classroom context isn't a positive one. And similarly, feelings of mastery are a key component of a positive classroom experience. Next slide. And so in operationalizing these to get to the subconstructs for positive learning experiences on the left, we focus on belonging and identity affirmation as two critical outcomes if teachers are successfully adapting high quality materials for student needs and identities. And then on the right, meeting grade level proficiency standards is, of course, a key indicator of students' mastery of grade level content. But you'll see this one has an asterisk too. And that's because providing a common student assessment is beyond the scope of what we would be able to do in this project. But we do include measures as a leading indicator of students' engagement with English language arts content through the work that they're undertaking in the classroom. Next slide. And so after going through that whole process, creating that framework and all the different levels of dimensions and constructs and subconstructs, we were left then with the steps 2 through 4 that Nate showed you in the earlier slide to actually identify measurement tools and create a coherent toolkit of tools that would work together that had a reasonable length and was practically feasible to implement. So where we landed was the system that is laid out here with 6 different data collection methods, each including around 10 items to capture all of the subconstructs included in the framework, other than the ones that I mentioned that were not included, like teacher mindsets and beliefs. As you can see here, if you look at the collection method and then the list of the constructs measured within that collection method, there is no single collection method that captures a single dimension of our framework in its entirety. Instead, you'll see that each dimension is captured across multiple methods, and that allows us to be able to triangulate information across different sources. So for example, we capture information about professional learning characteristics through a teacher survey, as well as a short teacher pulse check, which is administered at the end of an individual professional learning session, and also an observation rubric for an external observer to see what is happening in professional learning sessions. And you can also see that some of the methods here capture aspects of multiple dimensions, such as the classroom observation collection, which attends to teachers' instructional practice and also provides a window into students' engagement with content. At the same time, though, we are also capturing students' perspectives on their engagement through the student survey. And next slide. Which finally brings us to phase 2 that Stacy talked about at the beginning, which is currently underway, where we're working to pilot the toolkit in 6 district sites in collaboration with the 6 professional learning organizations that have participated in this project throughout. So by the end of this school year, we should have common data from these 6 sites that uses common tools from the toolkit and follows common implementation guidelines that we have provided. And this data will then be pooled into a shared data repository, which will then allow us to do some checks for data quality around survey response rates and rater agreement, start to look at how patterns in these data vary within and across the participating sites. And in addition to the analysis that's led by the Ripple research team around this, the professional learning organizations that are participating in this pilot will have access to be able to see how their data compares to everyone else's through this repository. And in so doing, both the Ripple team and the organizations can begin to investigate the linkages between the different dimensions in our framework. Thinking, for example, about how teachers' perceptions of professional learning might vary based on teachers' and leaders' views of system coherence. And I am now going to turn it over to Eliza from Unbound Ed to talk a little bit about their perspective as one of the participating organizations on this process of developing the framework and participating in the pilot.
Thanks, Ariel. So everyone spoke a little bit about what I'm going to talk about, but just want to sort of contextualize this a little bit in our context. So as we as an organization try to measure the effectiveness of our programs and our products and services, we're always on the lookout for validated measures, psychometrically sound measures that we can use, as opposed to sort of in-house building these measures and then establishing their validity and reliability. So in that sense, this toolkit has been really great. And then on the district side, when we work with our district partners, and in this case, our pilot district partners, some of these districts are districts who've worked with us for 3-5 years, have engaged in several of our offerings, and now want to understand sort of what's the return on investment. How do they advocate for continuing to work with us, especially to their school board, especially to other district leaders? And so having this toolkit that allows us to sort of go in, implement it, collect the data quickly, know that the data will be, the measures are sound, can sort of give them the information that they need, not only to sort of satisfy various shareholders, but make future decisions about their engagements. Ariel alluded to this, but the data repository is also a very powerful aspect of the toolkit. We're hoping we can learn from our peer organizations and sort of stop working in silos as PL organizations, right? So we can sort of, using the same measures that are tied, and I think this is a really cool aspect, that are tied to our individual organizations' theory of action and theory of changes, we can sort of understand the collective difference that we're making in the field. And then sort of like contribute to the sector, but also use this information for collective continuous improvement and collective iteration to think about across sort of the nation and across all of our various offerings, how are we making a difference with our practitioners? And then finally, the toolkit, I'm hoping, is sort of not the end of the road. And I know we were going to engage with Ripple on next steps. We're doing this for ELA. We want to do this for math, potentially other subjects as well. And we have our pilot districts as part of this endeavor, but there are other districts who we're working with in our organizations who also want to understand the effectiveness of our programs and our products and services. So we're hoping to use this toolkit beyond just this pilot work in our other districts. And also when funders come to us and say, hey, do you have measures that can show whether what you're doing is working or not? We can quickly take the measures available in this toolkit and implement it there. So sort of multiple benefits beyond just the pilot here. And I'll hand it off to our Rhode Island team.
Hey there. So I am here representing the Rhode Island team, which is the arm of the Annenberg Institute that works on research and support specifically with the state of Rhode Island and Rhode Island school districts. And as part of that work, we facilitate a professional learning network that includes 6 Rhode Island districts, all of whom are implementing new high quality instructional materials. And we have districts that are kind of along the spectrum of implementation, some of whom are years into their implementation of these new curricula that have been required by the state, and some of whom are in a piloting phase. And so we're getting these districts together to we're getting these districts together to discuss professional learning and to kind of help improve their practices. Districts have a lot of different goals with their professional learning, but most of them are rooted in curriculum implementation and also in student-centered instruction. At the beginning of this year in our engagement with the network, we were focusing on helping districts develop practical measures. So measurements that they could use to monitor their professional learning efforts, to ensure that both to ensure that things were kind of going the way that they wanted them to, but also to look for areas to improve and to also be able to share common sources of data across their schools and districts and across the network. And our focus really was on helping the districts develop some of their own tools. And what we found is that that's pretty challenging for a few reasons. One of them is, making, Ariel just talked about survey development. It's a pretty challenging process. The other is just kind of having the time and the capacity when you're working at a district level. Everyone's extremely busy with a lot of priorities, and developing these surveys can be really challenging. So this toolkit, as we were looking at this toolkit, we thought that would be a really useful tool to help districts monitor their professional learning. And what we've done is we've been rolling out the tool to these school districts over the past month or two. And we've also kind of taken care of, or we're taking care of all of the data collection and the data analysis for the school districts. So we've set up the school leader survey, the student survey, and the teacher survey in a survey platform. And we're able to kind of collect that data for school districts. And we're going to be reporting back to them the findings from these surveys. In order to make sure that the surveys are responsive to all the district's goals, we mapped all of the district's unique goals to the instruments from the toolkit. And we found a lot of coverage in aligning those goals to the constructs and the subconstructs that the survey measures. And in a couple cases, for example, there are some districts that were really focused on coaching. And so we would add or a question from another survey to kind of address those needs as well. Overall, though, we're still rolling this out, but we're hoping that these tools are going to help us achieve two goals with for the school districts and for the network. The first is to provide some visibility for district leaders into what's going on across the school district, especially when it comes to how students are experiencing these new curricula in the classroom, as well as how principals and assistant principals are coming along in their implementation of these tools. And so that visibility will, we hope, help districts be able to continuously improve in their ability to implement this new curriculum and to develop professional learning that's going to be responsive to their needs. The second use of this tool is for us to have some common data for the network districts. So our plan is, as we continue over the course of the year with the network, to facilitate sharing of these findings across the school districts, to help them have a common set of information in which to have discussions about how to improve their professional learning and their curriculum implementation. With that, I'll turn it back to, I think, Nate to keep us going.
Great, thank you. So this marks the turn in this webinar where we are moving from talking about our use of the tool, our creation of the tool, to the hope that you all can help us figure out how to make this better over time and what kind of uses you are thinking about. So if you open up this toolkit website, you'll see that we're thinking about this as something that can be used in a variety of different ways. And we actually document out these 4 different use cases. The idea that you can use the toolkit for in-depth diagnosis, that you can use it sort of as an ongoing monitoring tool where you're administering it over time. You could use it as part of cycles of improvement or an improvement science process. And you can use this to try to understand what's going on in certain bright spots across a district or a school or a system. And so again, we think each of those use cases calls for a different way of administering these different measurement instruments and a different cadence on which you do it. Some of them can be just quick snapshots and don't require you to do that much. Some of them will be more intensive use of these tools over time. But we aren't sure that's right? So what you heard is that we're in the middle of phase one, or we just finished phase one of this, and we're starting in the pilot where we're actually using this to gather data in a bunch of our systems, and hoping now that this webinar opens it up to all of you to gather data yourselves in the various places that you work. So if you go to the next slide, Krista. We are looking for your help making this work better over time. I will note that this is also a part of what we as you see, it's on our EdInstruments website. And EdInstruments is an initiative run out of Annenberg that tries to create a better repository for measurement tools, not only measurement tools about HQIM or about professional learning, but a broader set of measurement tools, because we feel like this problem that we're identifying here is actually a bigger problem across the education sphere and across education research, right? That we're all gathering data. We're all gathering now tremendous amounts of data, and often that data doesn't speak. We can't use it to speak across organizations, across sites. And so we think we can get better about that. And we think we can get better about that partly by making sure that researchers are defining things in the same way, but partly by making sure that the people in schools, the people gathering this data, have these types of toolkits at their disposal. And so the survey that Krista just dropped into the chat is a survey where we're just hoping that you will tell us, is this something that you would think about using in your own context, this toolkit? And if you're thinking about using it, could you flag that for us and tell us, would you like follow-up from us so that we can make sure we're planning the right next sessions that are more focused not only on what this thing is, but actually what it would look like to support you in your use, to think about all gathering data together, right? We're hoping to get to the point where eventually we have not only just these tools out there for you to use, but also some benchmark data comparisons so that you can see if 40% of your teachers are saying something, how does that compare with other places? And what does progress over time look like on this toolkit? So that is where we are. If you can, again, click on that survey. If you're interested in following up, please follow up with us. And I will pass to Stacy, I believe, to send us into breakouts.
Okay. Yeah, so I thought I was unmuted. I apologize. So we're going to go into breakouts. It'll be about 4 to 5 people per breakout. And we will drop these questions into the chat now and potentially also broadcast them to the breakout groups. And we just want you all to kind of take in what we talked about today and begin thinking about what works for you here in the measurement system that we have pulled together. How would it fit with what you're doing in your own work? What challenges you anticipate in integrating these measurement practices into your work? And again, to Nate's point and question in the form that Krista dropped, what supports would you need to implement this model in your work? So again, like what's landing for you, what feels critical to your own work, where do you foresee challenges? And then what types of supports would you need to be able to implement something like this? And we're gonna do that for, I think, Krista, can you let us know, is it about like 7 minutes that we'll do that for? We'll come back and we'll share out. Does that feel right?
Yeah, I'll broadcast the timing.
All right, great. So I think if you could all give us a moment to open up those breakout groups and then head to your group. We'll see you there.
Hello, everyone. So at this time, we'd like to invite folks to chat one takeaway or lingering thought you have based on your conversations in the breakout rooms. And as you're chatting those, can I ask some of our facilitators to share some of the things that they heard in their groups?
I can kick us off, Crystal. I think Mostly there were many questions about the tool, but I think one of the things we spent some time talking about were the trade-offs of using a tool like this, of the organizations that are currently trying to implement it, and how each of them have different service delivery models. So what does it look like to use this tool when you're doing direct-to-teacher coaching versus when you might be working with instructional leaders in a school who then are working with teachers? What does it look like to think about inter-rater reliability for observations and how that's traditionally done? And just really a discussion around better understanding all of that, right? That's what the pilot is for, trying to figure out how to use these things across multiple settings in different contexts and different service delivery models, and that it can still help us do the types of things that feel important to the work, like reducing the noise and clarifying some of the signal so that we can understand the relationships between the things that we're trying to shift and change for our teachers and students. And I'm done. If somebody wants to go next.
I can share. In my group, we talked a lot about how the toolkit felt a little incomplete at this point without having the tools available around beliefs and mindsets. And there was a lot of excitement around thinking about what Ripple might be able to do in that space going forward to try to bring that as a component, that you really need to understand that in order to sort of see the through line to shifts in student social emotional learning, social emotional experiences, and then also to learning.
I can go next. One of the things that we talked about in our group was folks shared that they appreciated how kind of clear and straightforward and streamlined the tools are. And they also wondered about the desire that school leaders might have to customize, to make them more kind of specific to the interventions or curricula in their locations at their schools, and how to invest the school leaders that we work with in the benefits of a set of tools that is aligned and also prioritizes some key common components.
That was a similar discussion to that we had in our group. It's talking about, you know, how to use this in context where kind of different different kinds of instructional practices are going on. So that was one, I think, really interesting part of the discussion, and thinking about how to maintain integrity to the tools while making sure that they're useful in the context in which you're using them. I think another really good point that came up was around what these tools can provide as far as a starting point for conversations. So I know kind of in our context, we're thinking about for our district network, like this is a good place to start conversations between districts, and heard about this being a good place to start conversations around, you know, practices in schools that could really kind of improve curriculum implementation and importantly, just instructional practice as well.
Great. We're also hearing from Curran, who was saying in our group, there was a wondering about how different curricula might affect the generalizability of the data from the toolkit. Can you really compare if one school district shifted to curriculum A, whereas another school district shifted to curriculum B? So I think this is a question about how the curricula itself that folks are using also impact the ways that these relationships are occurring. Thanks, Curran, for this. Anybody else?
I'll go.
Our group had an interesting conversation about families and communities and the things that families and communities might be able to tell you about kids' sense of engagement and belonging around specific academic things and around the curriculum, and what it would take to get those, to actually be able to get those views in ways that felt still feasible and like this could be a low lift toolkit.
Really interesting. Nona, yes, go ahead, Nona.
Yeah, I thought there were a lot of great questions. I loved how they were, like someone already said that the instruments were simple. Having done a lot of survey analysis and data collection and research, there's a lot of instruments, and trying to coordinate this across a school or district and then synthesize it back and make it actionable so that it was, you know, it has an immediate ROI.
as someone else had said, like the feedback loops, like our focus is like only collect data if you can act on it right away, and then give them the, you know, strategy or the practice based immediately on the results of the survey. And I just wonder, knowing how hard it is even to get people to use a survey that provides immediate feedback, what are your thoughts on like having the 6 different, you know, data collection methods? Is it like, would you guys like, is it a project manager that kind of issues it and identifies it, and or is it on one platform? Like, how are you envisioning like the rollout and the return on investment for practice in like real time?
So I think this is a great question for Ariel. If Ariel, maybe you could just talk about the one-to-one work you've been doing with each organization to figure this out, and then we can toss it back to Krista to close us out.
Yeah, so for this pilot, we've been very much thinking about building off of each organization's existing data infrastructure, and it's been mostly at the level of these organizations that are providing professional learning services. And so the data are both used from a continuous improvement perspective for them, as well as working with districts and district leaders, and not necessarily directly feedback to teachers in the moment. And so we've been sort of working to figure out how to implement it within that context. But I think the question more broadly outside of this pilot is a great one, and one that we should continue to think about.
Thanks, Ariel. Grant, would you mind coming off? I know we want to kick it back to Krista. Actually, I think we have to kick it back to Krista. I will follow up with you on this. No? No, go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah. Last
Okay.
one, Grant.
All right, Grant, could you just voice over this specifically? What types of limitations are you thinking about?
No, nothing specific. I just was wondering if, if HMH wants to use this to conduct a research study, as long as we are citing the toolkit in our research. Just wanted to make sure that, it's IP, that there's no restrictions on using it in that sense.
No, this is open source and
Right.
accessible. We want as many folks to use it as possible. What we would be interested in is, would you be willing to share that data, right? And add to our ability to say more about this model across the field. And then, of course, as Ariel was saying, we have recommendations for data collection and best methods to make that data usable. And we want to help everybody to be able to do that as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Kristen.
That was actually a great segue. So thank you all for joining us today on behalf of Ripple and EdInstruments. Just want to give a huge thanks to our presenters and facilitators, and thanks to all of you that joined today. On your way out, please let us know what you thought of today's event by answering our feedback survey, where you'll have a chance to subscribe to both Ripple and EdInstruments mailing lists. If you're interested in joining Ripple, the Ripple Network as a researcher or organization, visit our page and apply by March 7th. But with that, thank you all so much. Continue to measure your days by, what was it? Coffee, naps, spending time with loved ones.
Chocolate.
Chocolate's the one I remember.
Kitchen dance.
So good. Thank you all.